Don't forget to subscribe. Afterwards, the wisest and most spiritual books from the greatest authors await you every day. And now buckle up, sit back and we'll begin. Herodotus. The history of Herodotus. So when the herdsman had made known the truth, Astyages now cared less about him. But with Harpagos he was very greatly displeased and bade his spearmen summon him. And when Harpagos came, Astyages asked him thus: "By what death, Harpagos, didst thou destroy the child whom I delivered to thee, born of my daughter?" And Harpagos, seeing that the herdsman was in the king's palace, turned not to any false way of speech, lest he should be convicted and found out, but said as follows: "O king, so soon as I received the child, I took counsel and considered how I should do according to thy mind, and how without offense to thy command, I might not be guilty of murder against thy daughter and against thyself. I did therefore thus. I called this herdsman and delivered the child to him, saying first that thou wert he who bade him slay it, and in this at least I did not lie, for thou didst so command. I delivered it, I say, to this man, commanding him to place it upon a desolate mountain, and to stay by it and watch it until it should die, threatening him with all kinds of punishment if he should fail to accomplish this. And when he had done that which was ordered and the child was dead, I sent the most trusted of my eunuchs, and through them I saw and buried the child. Thus, O king, it happened about this matter, and the child had this death which I say." So Harpagos declared the truth, and Astyages concealed the anger which he kept against him for that which had come to pass. And first he related the matter over again to Harpagos, according as he had been told it by the herdsman, and afterwards, when it had been thus repeated by him, he ended by saying that the child was alive, and that that which had come to pass was well, for, continued he, I was greatly troubled by that which had been done to this child, and I thought it no light thing that I had been made at variance with my daughter. Therefore consider that this is a happy change of fortune, and first send thy son to be with the boy who is newly come, and then, seeing that I intend to make a sacrifice of thanksgiving for the preservation of the boy to those gods to whom that honor belongs, be here thyself to dine with me." When Harpagos heard this, he did reverence and thought it a great matter that his offense had turned out for his profit, and moreover that he had been invited to dinner with happy augury, and so he went to his house. And having entered it straightway, he sent forth his son, for he had one only son of about 13 years old, bidding him go to the palace of Astyages, and do whatsoever the king should command, and he himself being overjoyed told his wife that which had befallen him. But Astyages, when the son of Harpagos arrived, cut his throat and divided him limb from limb, and having roasted some pieces of the flesh and boiled others, he caused them to be dressed for eating, and kept them ready. And when the time arrived for dinner and the other guests were present and also Harpagos, then before the other guests and before Astyages himself were placed tables covered with flesh of sheep, but before Harpagos was placed the flesh of his own son, all but the head and the hands and the feet, 128, and these were laid aside covered up in a basket. Then when it seemed that Harpagos was satisfied with food, Astyages asked him whether he had been pleased with the banquet, and when Harpagos said that he had been very greatly pleased, they who had been commanded to do this brought to him the head of his son covered up, together with the hands and the feet, and standing near they bade Harpagos uncover and take of them that which he desired. So when Harpagos obeyed and uncovered, he saw the remains of his son, and seeing them he was not overcome with amazement, but contained himself. And Astyages asked him whether he perceived of what animal he had been eating the flesh. And he said that he perceived, and that whatsoever the king might do was well pleasing to him. Thus having made answer and taking up the parts of the flesh which still remained, he went to his house, and after that, I suppose, he would gather all the parts together and bury them. On Harpagos Astyages laid this penalty, and about Cyrus he took thought, and summoned the same men of the Magians, who had given judgment about his dream in the manner which has been said. And when they came, Astyages asked how they had given judgment about his vision, and they spoke according to the same manner, saying that the child must have become king if he had lived on and had not died before. He made answer to them thus: "The child is alive and not dead." And while he was dwelling in the country, the boys of the village appointed him king, and he performed completely all those things which they do who are really kings, for he exercised rule, appointed to their places spearmen of the guard and doorkeepers and bearers of messages and all else. Now therefore, to what does it seem to you that these things tend? The Magians said, "If the child is still alive and became king without any arrangement, be thou confident concerning him and have good courage, for he shall not be ruler again the second time, since some even of our oracles have had but small results, and that at least which has to do with dreams comes often in the end to a feeble accomplishment." Astyages made answer in these words: "I myself also, O Magians, am most disposed to believe that this is so, namely that since the boy was named king, the dream has had its fulfillment, and that this boy is no longer a source of danger to me. Nevertheless give counsel to me, having well considered what is likely to be most safe both for my house and for you." Replying to this, the Magians said, "To us also, O king, it is of great consequence that thy rule should stand firm, for in the other case it is transferred to strangers, coming round to this boy who is a Persian, and we being Medes are made slaves and become of no account in the eyes of the Persians, seeing that we are of different race, but while thou art established as our king, who art one of our own nation, we both have our share of rule and receive great honors from thee. Thus then we must by all means have a care of thee and of thy rule. And now, if we saw in this anything to cause fear, we would declare all to thee beforehand. But as the dream has had its issue in a trifling manner, both we ourselves are of good cheer, and we exhort thee to be so likewise. And as for this boy, send him away from before thine eyes to the Persians and to his parents." When he heard this, Astyages rejoiced, and calling Cyrus spoke to him thus: "My son, I did thee wrong by reason of a vision of a dream which has not come to pass, but thou art yet alive by thine own destiny. Now therefore go in peace to the land of the Persians, and I will send with thee men to conduct thee. And when thou art come thither, thou shalt find a father and a mother, not after the fashion of Mithridates the herdsman and his wife." Thus having spoken, Astyages sent Cyrus away, and when he had returned and come to the house of Cambyses, his parents received him, and after that, when they learned who he was, they welcomed him not a little, for they had supposed without doubt that their son had perished straightway after his birth, and they inquired in what manner he had survived. And he told them, saying that before this he had not known but had been utterly in error. On the way, however, he had learned all his own fortunes. For he had supposed without doubt that he was the son of the herdsman of Astyages, but since his journey from the city began, he had learnt the whole story from those who conducted him. And he said that he had been brought up by the wife of the herdsman and continued to praise her throughout, so that Kino was the chief person in his tale. And his parents took up this name from him, and in order that their son might be thought by the Persians to have been preserved in a more supernatural manner, they set on foot a report that Cyrus, when he was exposed, had been reared by a bitch. And from that source has come this report. Then as Cyrus grew to be a man, being of all those of his age the most courageous and the best beloved, Harpagos sought to become his friend and sent him gifts, because he desired to take vengeance on Astyages. For he saw not how from himself, who was in a private station, punishment should come upon Astyages, but when he saw Cyrus growing up, he endeavored to make him an ally, finding a likeness between the fortunes of Cyrus and his own. And even before that time he had effected something. For Astyages being harsh towards the Medes, Harpagos communicated severally with the chief men of the Medes, and persuaded them that they must make Cyrus their leader and cause Astyages to cease from being king. When he had effected this and when all was ready, then Harpagos, wishing to make known his design to Cyrus, who lived among the Persians, could do it no other way, seeing that the roads were watched, but devised a scheme as follows. He made ready a hare, and having cut open its belly, but without pulling off any of the fur, he put into it, just as it was, a piece of paper, having written upon it that which he thought good, and then he sewed up again the belly of the hare, and giving nets as if he were a hunter to that one of his servants whom he trusted most, he sent him away to the land of the Persians, enjoining him by word of mouth to give the hare to Cyrus, and to tell him at the same time to open it with his own hands, and let no one else be present when he did so. This then was accomplished, and Cyrus, having received from him the hare, cut it open, and having found within it the paper, he took and read it over. And the writing said this: Son of Cambyses, over thee the gods keep guard, for otherwise thou wouldst never have come to so much good fortune. Do thou therefore 133 take vengeance on Astyages, who is thy murderer, for so far as his will is concerned thou art dead, but by the care of the gods and of me thou art still alive, and this I think thou hast long ago learned from first to last, both how it happened about thyself, and also what things I have suffered from Astyages, because I did not slay thee, but gave thee to the herdsman. If therefore thou wilt be guided by me, thou shalt be ruler of all that land over which now Astyages is ruler. Persuade the Persians to revolt, and march any army against the Medes. And whether I shall be appointed leader of the army against thee, or any other of the Medes who are in repute, thou hast what thou desirest, for these will be the first to attempt to destroy Astyages, revolting from him, and coming over to thy party. Consider then that here at least all is ready, and therefore do this and do it with speed. Cyrus, having heard this, began to consider in what manner he might most skillfully persuade the Persians to revolt, and on consideration, he found that this was the most convenient way, and so in fact he did. He wrote first on a paper that which he desired to write, and he made an assembly of the Persians. Then he unfolded the paper and reading from it, said that Astyages appointed him commander of the Persians, and now, O Persians, he continued, I give you command to come to me each one with a reaping hook. Cyrus then proclaimed this command. Now there are of the Persians many tribes, and some of them Cyrus gathered together and persuaded to revolt from the Medes, namely those upon which all the other Persians depend, the Pasargadae, the Marathians and the Maspians, And of these the Pasargadae are the most noble, of whom also the Achaemenidae are a clan, whence are sprung the Perseid 134 kings. But other Persian tribes there are, as follows. The Panthalians, the Darasians and the Germanians, these are all tillers of the soil, and the rest are nomad tribes, namely the Daoi, Mardians, Dropicans and Sagartians. Now there was a certain region of the Persian land which was overgrown with thorns, extending some 18 or 20 furlongs in each direction. And when all had come with that which they had been before commanded to bring, Cyrus bade them clear this region for cultivation within 1 day. And when the Persians had achieved the task proposed, then he bade them come to him on the next day bathed and clean. Meanwhile Cyrus, having gathered together in one place all the flocks of goats and sheep and the herds of cattle belonging to his father, slaughtered them and prepared with them to entertain the host of the Persians, and moreover with wine and other provisions of the most agreeable kind. So when the Persians came on the next day, he made them recline in a meadow and feasted them. And when they had finished dinner, Cyrus asked them whether that which they had on the former day or that which they had now seemed to them preferable. They said that the difference between them was great, for the former day had for them nothing but evil, and the present day nothing but good. Taking up this saying, Cyrus proceeded to lay bare his whole design, saying, Men of the Persians, thus it is with you. If ye will do as I say, ye have these and 10,000 other good things, with no servile labor. But if ye will not do as I say, ye have labors like that of yesterday innumerable. Now therefore do as I say and make yourselves free. For I seem to myself to have been born by providential fortune to take these matters in hand, and I think that ye are not worse men than the Medes, either in other matters or in those which have to do with war. Consider then that this is so, and make revolt from Astyages forthwith. So the Persians, having obtained a leader, willingly attempted to set themselves free, since they had already for a long time been indignant to be ruled by the Medes. But when Astyages heard that Cyrus was acting thus, he sent a messenger and summoned him, and Cyrus bade the messenger report to Astyages that he would be with him sooner than he would himself desire. So Astyages, hearing this, armed all the Medes, and blinded by divine providence, he appointed Harpagos to be the leader of the army, forgetting what he had done to him. Then when the Medes had marched out and began to fight with the Persians, some of them continued the battle, namely those who had not been made partakers in the design, while others went over to the Persians, but the greater number were willfully slack and fled. So when the Median army had been shamefully dispersed, so soon as Astyages heard of it, he said, threatening Cyrus. But not even so shall Cyrus at least escape punishment. Thus having spoken, he first impaled the Magian interpreters of dreams who had persuaded him to let Cyrus go, and then he armed those of the Medes, youths and old men, who had been left behind in the city. These he led out, and having engaged battle with the Persians, he was worsted, and Astyages himself was taken alive, and he lost also those of the Medes whom he had led forth. Then when Astyages was a prisoner, Harpagos came and stood near him and rejoiced over him and insulted him. And besides other things which he said to grieve him, he asked him especially how it pleased him to be a slave instead of a king, making reference to that dinner at which Astyages had feasted him with the flesh of his own son. 135 He looking at him asked him in return whether he claimed the work of Cyrus as his own deed. And Harpagos said that since he had written the letter, the deed was justly his. Then Astyages declared him to be at the same time the most unskillful and the most unjust of men. The most unskillful because, when it was in his power to become king, as it was, if that which had now been done was really brought about by him, he had conferred the chief power on another, and the most unjust, because on account of that dinner, he had reduced the Medes to slavery. For if he must needs confer the kingdom on some other and not keep it himself, it was more just to give this good thing to one of the Medes, rather than to one of the Persians, whereas now the Medes, who were guiltless of this, had become slaves instead of masters, and the Persians who formerly were slaves of the Medes, had now become their masters. Astyages then, having been king for 35 years, was thus caused to cease from being king, and the Medes stooped under the yoke of the Persians because of his cruelty, after they had ruled Asia above the river Halys for 128 years, except during that period for which the Scythians had rule. 136 afterwards, however, it repented them that they had done this, and they revolved from Darius, and having revolted they were subdued again, being conquered in a battle. At this time then, I say, in the reign of Astyages, the Persians with Cyrus rose up against the Medes, and from that time forth were rulers of Asia. But as for Astyages, Cyrus did no harm to him besides, but kept him with himself until he died. Thus born and bred Cyrus became king, and after this he subdued Croesus, who was the first to begin the quarrel, as I have before said, and having subdued him, he then became ruler of all Asia. These are the customs, so far as I know, which the Persians practice. Images and temples and altars they do not account it lawful to erect, nay, they even charge with folly those who do these things, and this, as it seems to me, because they do not account the gods to be in the likeness of men, as do the Hellenes. But it is their wont to perform sacrifices to Zeus, going up to the most lofty of the mountains, and the whole circle of the heavens they call Zeus. And they sacrifice to the sun and the moon and the earth, to fire and to water and to the winds. These are the only gods to whom they have sacrificed ever from the first, but they have learned also to sacrifice to Aphrodite Urania. Having learnt it both from the Assyrians and the Arabians, and the Assyrians call Aphrodite Melita, the Arabians Alita, 13,601, and the Persians Mitra. Now this is the manner of sacrifice for the gods aforesaid which is established among the Persians. They make no altars, neither do they kindle fire, and when they mean to sacrifice they use no libation nor music of the pipe, nor chaplets 137, nor meal for sprinkling 138, but when a man wishes to sacrifice to any one of the gods, he leads the animal for sacrifice to an unpolluted place, and calls upon the god. Having his tiara 13,801 wreathed round generally with a branch of myrtle. For himself alone separately the man who sacrifices may not request good things in his prayer, but he prays that it may be well with all the Persians, and with the king, for he himself also is included of course in the whole body of Persians. And when he has cut up the victim into pieces and boiled the flesh, he spreads a layer of the freshest grass and especially clover, upon which he places forthwith all the pieces of flesh, and when he has placed them in order, a Magian man stands by them and chants over them a theogony, for of this nature, they say that their incantation is, seeing that without a Magian, it is not lawful for them to make sacrifices. Then after waiting a short time the sacrificer carries away the flesh and uses it for whatever purpose he pleases. And of all days their wont is to honor most that on which they were born, each one. On this they think it right to set out a feast more liberal than on other days. And in this feast the wealthier of them set upon the table an ox or a horse or a camel or an ass, roasted whole in an oven, and the poor among them set out small animals in the same way. They have few solid dishes, 139, but many served up after as dessert, and these not in a single course. And for this reason the Persians say that the Hellenes leave off dinner hungry, because after dinner, they have nothing worth mentioning served up as dessert, whereas if any good dessert were served up they would not stop eating so soon. To wine drinking they are very much given, and it is not permitted for a man to vomit or to make water in presence of another. Thus do they provide against these things. And they are wont to deliberate when drinking hard about the most important of their affairs, and whatsoever conclusion has pleased them in their deliberation, this on the next day, when they are sober, the master of the house in which they happen to be when they deliberate lays before them for discussion. And if it pleases them when they are sober also, they adopt it, but if it does not please them, they let it go. And that on which they have had the first deliberation when they are sober, they consider again when they are drinking. When they meet one another in the roads, by this you may discern whether those who meet are of equal rank, for, instead of greeting by words they kiss one another on the mouth, but if one of them is a little inferior to the other, they kiss one another on the cheeks, and if one is of much less noble rank than the other, he falls down before him and does worship to him. And they honor of all most after themselves those nations which dwell nearest to them, and next those which dwell next nearest, and so they go on giving honor in proportion to distance, and they hold least in honor those who dwell furthest off from themselves, esteeming themselves to be by far the best of all the human race on every point, and thinking that others possess merit, according to the proportion which is here stated, and that those who dwell furthest from themselves are the worst. And under the supremacy of the Medes the various nations used also to govern one another according to the same rule as the Persians observe in giving honor, the Medes governing the whole and in particular those who dwelt nearest to themselves, and these having rule over those who bordered upon them, and those again over the nations that were next to them. For the race went forward thus ever from government by themselves to government through others. The Persians more than any other men admit foreign usages, for they both wear the Median dress, judging it to be more comely than their own, and also for fighting the Egyptian corslet. Moreover, they adopt all kinds of luxuries when they hear of them, and in particular they have learned from the Hellenes to have commerce with boys. They marry each one several lawful wives, and they get also a much larger number of concubines. It is established as a sign of manly excellence next after excellence in fight, to be able to show many sons, and to those who have most the king sends gifts every year, for they consider number to be a source of strength. And they educate their children, beginning at 5 years old and going on till 20, in 3 things only, in writing, in shooting, and in speaking the truth. But before the boy is 5 years old he does not come into the presence of his father, but lives with the women. And it is so done for this reason, that if the child should die while he is being bred up, he may not be the cause of any grief to his father. I commend this custom of theirs, and also the one which is next to be mentioned, namely that neither the king himself shall put any to death for one cause alone, nor any of the other Persians for one cause alone, shall do hurt that is irremediable to any of his own servants, But if after reckoning he finds that the wrongs done are more in number and greater than the services rendered, 143, then only he gives vent to his anger. Moreover, they say that no one ever killed his own father or mother, but whatever deeds have been done which seem to be of this nature, if examined must necessarily, they say, be found to be due either to changelings or to children of adulterous birth. For, say they, it is not reasonable to suppose that the true parent would be killed by his own son. Whatever things it is not lawful for them to do, these it is not lawful for them even to speak of. And the most disgraceful thing in their estimation is to tell and lie, and next to this to owe money. This last for many other reasons, but especially because it is necessary, they say, for him who owes money, also sometimes to tell lies. And whosoever of the men of the city has leprosy or whiteness of skin, he does not come into a city nor mingle with the other Persians, and they say that he has these diseases because he has offended in some way against the son. But a stranger who is taken by these diseases, in many regions they drive out of the country altogether, and also white doves, alleging against him the same cause. And into a river they neither make water nor spit, neither do they wash their hands in it, nor allow any other to do these things, but they reverence rivers very greatly. This moreover also has chanced to them, which the Persians have themselves failed to notice, but I have not failed to do so. Their names, which are formed to correspond with their bodily shapes or their magnificence of station, and all with the same letter, that letter which the Dorians call San and the Ionians Sigma. With this you will find, if you examine the matter, that all the Persian names end not some with this and others with other letters, but all alike. So much I am able to say for certain from my own knowledge about them. But what follows is reported about their dead as a secret mystery, and not with clearness, namely that the body of a Persian man is not buried until it has been torn by a bird or a dog. The Magians I know for a certainty have this practice, for they do it openly. However that may be, the Persians cover the body with wax, and then bury it in the earth. Now the Magians are distinguished in many ways from other men, as also from the priests in Egypt. For these last esteem it a matter of purity to kill no living creature, except the animals which they sacrifice, but the Magians kill with their own hands all creatures except dogs and men, and they even make this a great end to aim at, killing both ants and serpents and all other creeping and flying things. About this custom then be it as it was from the first established, and I return now to the former narrative. 145 The Ionians and Aeolians, as soon as the Lydians had been subdued by the Persians, sent messengers to Cyrus at Sardis, desiring to be his subjects on the same terms as they had been subjects of Croesus. And when he heard that which they proposed to him, he spoke to them a fable, saying that a certain player on the pipe saw fishes in the sea and played on his pipe, supposing that they would come out to land, but being deceived in his expectation, he took a casting net and enclosed a great multitude of the fishes, and drew them forth from the water. And when he saw them leaping about, he said to the fishes, "Stop dancing, I pray you now, seeing that ye would not come out and dance before when I piped." Cyrus spoke this fable to the Ionians and Aeolians for this reason, because the Ionians had refused to comply before, when Cyrus himself by a messenger requested them to revolt from Croesus, while now when the conquest had been made they were ready to submit to Cyrus. Thus he said to them in anger, and the Ionians, when they heard this answer brought back to their cities, put walls round about them severally, and gathered together to the Pannonian, all except the men of Miletus, for with these alone Cyrus had sworn an agreement on the same terms as the Lydians had granted. The rest of the Ionians resolved by common consent to send messengers to Sparta to ask the Spartans to help the Ionians. These Ionians, to whom belongs the Pannonian, had the fortune to build their cities in the most favorable position for climate and seasons of any men whom we know. For neither the regions above Ionia nor those below, neither those towards the east nor those towards the west, 146 produced the same results as Ionia itself, the regions in the one direction being oppressed by cold and moisture, and those in the other by heat and drought. And these do not use all the same speech, but have 4 different variations of language. 147 First of their cities on the side of the south lies Miletus, and next to it Myus and Prion. These are settlements made in Caria, and speak the same language with one another, and the following are in Lydia: Ephesos, Colophon, Libidos, Teos, Clazomenae, Phocaea. These cities resemble not at all those mentioned before in the speech which they use, but they agree one with another. There remain besides 3 Ionian cities, of which 2 are established in the islands of Samos and Chios, and one is built upon the mainland, namely Erythrae. Now the men of Chios and of Erythrae use the same form of language, but the Samians have one for themselves alone. Thus there result 4 separate forms of language. Of these Ionians then those of Miletus were sheltered from danger, since they had sworn an agreement, and those of them who lived in islands had no cause for fear, for the Phoenicians were not yet subjects of the Persians, and the Persians themselves were not seamen. Now these 148 were parted off from the other Ionians for no other reason than this. The whole Hellenic nation was at that time weak, but of all its races, the Ionian was much the weakest and of least account. Except Athens, indeed, it had no considerable city. Now the other Ionians, and among them the Athenians, avoided the name, not wishing to be called Ionians. Nay, even now I perceive that the greater number of them are ashamed of the name. But these 12 cities not only prided themselves on the name, but established a temple of their own, to which they gave the name of Pannonian. And they made resolution not to grant a share in it to any other Ionians, nor indeed did any ask to share it except those of Smyrna, just as the Dorians of that district, which is now called the 5 cities but was formerly called the 6 cities, take care not to admit any of the neighboring Dorians to the temple of Triopian, and even exclude from sharing in it those of their own body who commit any offense as regards the temple. For example, in the games of the Triopian Apollo they used formerly to set bronze tripods as prizes for the victors, and the rule was that those who received them should not carry them out of the temple, but dedicate them then and there to the god. There was a man then of Halicarnassos, whose name was Agasicles, who being a victor, paid no regard to this rule, but carried away the tripod to his own house, and hung it up there upon a nail. On this ground the other 5 cities, Lindos, Iolissos and Chimeros, Kos and Knidos, excluded the 6th city Halicarnassos from sharing in the temple. Upon these they laid this penalty. But as for the Ionians, I think that the reason why they made of themselves 12 cities and would not receive any more into their body was because when they dwelt in Peloponnesus there were of them 12 divisions, just as now there are 12 divisions of the Achaeans who drove the Ionians out. For first, beginning from the side of Sicyon, comes Pellene, then Egera and Igai. in which last is the river Crathis with a perpetual flow, whence the river of the same name in Italy received its name, and Bura and Helike, to which the Ionians fled for refuge when they were worsted by the Achaeans in fight, and Aegean and Ripes and Patres and Phares and Alenos, where is the great river Paros, and Dyme and Tridaeus, of which the last alone has an inland position. These form now 12 divisions of the Achaeans, and in former times they were divisions of the Ionians. For this reason then the Ionians also made for themselves 12 cities, for at any rate to say that these are any more Ionians than the other Ionians, or have at all a nobler descent, is mere folly, considering that a large part of them are Abantians from Euboea, who have no share even in the name of Ionia, and Minyae of Orchomenos have been mingled with them. And Cadmeans and Riopians and Phocians who seceded from their native state, and Molossians and Pelasgians of Arcadia and Dorians of Epidaurus and many other races have been mingled with them, and those of them who set forth to their settlements from the city hall of Athens, and who esteem themselves the most noble by descent of the Ionians, these, I say, brought no women with them to their settlement, but took Carian women, whose parents they slew. And on account of this slaughter these women laid down for themselves a rule, imposing oaths on one another, and handed it on to their daughters, that they should never eat with their husbands, nor should a wife call her own husband by name, for this reason, because the Ionians had slain their fathers and husbands and children, and then having done this had them to wife. This happened at Miletus. Moreover some of them set Lycian kings over them, descendants of Glaucus and Hippolachos, while others were ruled by Cauconians of Pylos, descendants of Codros the son of Melanthos, and others again by princes of the two races combined. Since however these hold on to the name more than the other Ionians, let them be called, if they will, the Ionians of truly pure descent, but in fact all are Ionians who have their descent from Athens, and who keep the feast of Apaturia, and this all keep except the men of Ephesos and Colophon. For these alone of all the Ionians do not keep the Apaturia, and that on the ground of some murder committed. Now the Pannonian is a sacred place on the north side of Mycale, set apart by common agreement of the Ionians for Poseidon of Helike 152, and this Mycale is a promontory of the mainland running out westwards towards Samos, where the Ionians gathering together from their cities used to hold a festival which they called the Pannonia. And not only the feasts of the Ionians, but also those of all the Hellenes equally are subject to this rule, that their names all end in the same letter, just like the names of the Persians. These then are the Ionian cities, and those of Iolia are as follows: Chyme, which is called Fricanus, Larissae, Neon Tychos, Temnos, Killa, Notion, Igerosa, Pitane, Aigai, Marina, Grynia. These are the ancient cities of the Aeolians, 11 in number, since one, Smyrna, was severed from them by the Ionians, for these cities, that is those on the mainland, used also formerly to be 12 in number. And these Aeolians had the fortune to settle in a land which is more fertile than that of the Ionians, but in respect of climate less favored. Now the Aeolians lost Smyrna in the following manner. Certain men of Colophon, who had been worsted in party strife and had been driven from their native city, were received there for refuge. And after this the Colophonian exiles watched for a time when the men of Smyrna were celebrating a festival to Dionysos outside the walls, and then they closed the gates against them and got possession of the city. After this, when the whole body of Aeolians came to the rescue, They made an agreement that the Ionians should give up the movable goods, and that on this condition, the Aeolians should abandon Smyrna. When the men of Smyrna had done this, the remaining 11 cities divided them amongst themselves and made them their own citizens. These then are the Aeolian cities upon the mainland, with the exception of those situated on Mount Ida, for these are separate from the rest. And of those which are in the islands, there are 5 in Lesbos, for the 6th, which was situated in Lesbos, namely Arisba, was enslaved by the men of Methymna, though its citizens were of the same race as they. And in Tenedos there is one city, and another in what are called the 100 Isles. Now the Lesbians and the men of Tenedos, like those Ionians who dwelt in the islands, had no cause for fear, but the remaining cities came to a common agreement to follow the Ionians whithersoever they should lead. Now when the messengers from the Ionians and Aeolians came to Sparta, for this business was carried out with speed, they chose before all others to speak for them the Phocaean, whose name was Pathermos. He then put upon him a purple cloak, in order that as many as possible of the Spartans might hear of it and come together, and having been introduced before the assembly 155, he spoke at length, asking the Spartans to help them. The Lacedaemonians, however, would not listen to him, but resolved on the contrary not to help the Ionians. So they departed, and the Lacedaemonians, having dismissed the messengers of the Ionians, sent men notwithstanding in a ship of 50 oars, to find out, as I imagine, about the affairs of Cyrus and about Ionia. These, when they came to Phocaea, sent to Sardis the man of most repute among them, whose name was Lacrines, to report to Cyrus the saying of the Lacedaemonians, bidding him do hurt to no city of the Hellas, since they would not permit it. When the herald had spoken thus, Cyrus is said to have asked those of the Hellenes whom he had with him, what men the Lacedaemonians were, and how many in number, that they made this proclamation to him, and hearing their answer he said to the Spartan herald, "Never yet did I fear men such as these, who have a place appointed in the midst of their city where they gather together and deceive one another by false oaths. And if I continue in good health, not the misfortunes of the Ionians will be for them a subject of talk, but rather their own." These words Cyrus threw out scornfully with reference to the Hellenes in general, because they have got for themselves markets and practice buying and selling there, for the Persians themselves are not wont to use markets, nor have they any marketplace at all. After this he entrusted Sardis to Tabelos a Persian, and the gold both of Croesus and of the other Lydians he gave to Pactyus a Lydian to take charge of, and himself marched away to Ecbatana, taking with him Croesus, and making for the present no account of the Ionians. For Babylon stood in his way still, as also the Bactrian nation and the Sacans and the Egyptians, and against these he meant to make expeditions himself, while sending some other commander about the Ionians. But when Cyrus had marched away from Sardis, Pactyus caused the Lydians to revolt from Tabelos and from Cyrus. This man went down to the sea, and having in his possession all the gold that there had been in Sardis, he hired for himself mercenaries, and persuaded the men of the sea coast to join his expedition. So he marched on Sardis and besieged Tabelos, having shut himself up in the citadel. Hearing this on his way, Cyrus said to Croesus as follows: "Croesus, what end shall I find of these things which are coming to pass? The Lydians will not cease, as it seems, from giving trouble to me and from having it themselves. I doubt me if it were not best 157 to sell them all as slaves, for as it is, I see that I have done in like manner, as if one should slay the father and then spare his sons. Just so I took prisoner and am carrying away thee, who wert much more than the father of the Lydians, while to the Lydians themselves I delivered up their city. And can I feel surprise after this that they have revolted from me?" Thus he said what was in his mind. But Croesus answered him as follows, fearing lest he should destroy Sardis. "O king, that which thou hast said is not without reason, but do not thou altogether give vent to thy wrath, nor destroy an ancient city which is guiltless both of the former things, and also of those which have come to pass now. For as to the former things it was I who did them, and I bear the consequences heaped upon my head." 158. And as for what is now being done, since the wrongdoer is Pactyas, to whom thou didst entrust the charge of Sardis, let him pay the penalty. But the Lydians I pray thee pardon, and lay upon them commands as follows, in order that they may not revolt, nor be a cause of danger to thee. Send to them and forbid them to possess weapons of war, but bid them on the other hand, put on tunics under their outer garments, and be shod with buskins, and proclaim to them that they train their sons to play the lyre and the harp, and to be retail dealers, and soon thou shalt see, O king, that they have become women instead of men, so that there will be no fear that they will revolt from thee." Croesus, I say, suggested to him this, perceiving that this was better for the Lydians than to be reduced to slavery and sold, for he knew that if he did not offer a sufficient reason, he would not persuade Cyrus to change his mind, and he feared lest at some future time, if they should escape the present danger, the Lydians might revolt from the Persians and be destroyed. And Cyrus was greatly pleased with the suggestion made and slackened from his wrath, saying that he agreed with his advice. Then he called Mazars a Mede, and laid charge upon him to proclaim to the Lydians that which Croesus suggested, and moreover to sell into slavery all the rest who had joined with the Lydians in the expedition to Sardis, and finally by all means to bring Pactyas himself alive to Cyrus. Having given this charge upon the road, he continued his march to the native land of the Persians, but Pactyas, hearing that an army was approaching to fight against him, was struck with fear and fled away forthwith to Kyme. Then Mazars the Mede marched upon Sardis with a certain portion of the army of Cyrus, and as he did not find Pactyas or his followers any longer at Sardis, he first compelled the Lydians to perform the commands of Cyrus, and by his commands, the Lydians changed the whole manner of their life. After this Mazars proceeded to send messengers to Kyme, bidding them give up Pactyas. And the men of Kyme resolved to refer to the god at Branchidae the question what counsel they should follow. For there was there an oracle established of old time, which all the Ionians and Aeolians were wont to consult, and this place is in the territory of Miletos above the port of Panormos. So the men of Kyme sent messengers to the Branchidae to inquire of the god, and they asked what course they should take about Pactyas, so as to do that which was pleasing to the gods. When they thus inquired, the answer was given them that they should deliver up Pactyas to the Persians. And the men of Kyme, having heard this answer reported, were disposed to give him up. Then when the mass of the people were thus disposed, Aristodicus the son of Heracles, a man of repute among the citizens, stopped the men of Kyme from doing so, having distrust of the answer and thinking that those sent to inquire were not speaking the truth, until at last other messengers were sent to the oracle to ask a second time about Pactyas, and of them, Aristodicus was one. When these came to Branchidae, Aristodicus stood forth from the rest and consulted the oracle, asking as follows. Lord, there came to us a suppliant for protection, Pactyus the Lydian, flying from a violent death at the hands of the Persians, and they demand him from us, bidding the men of Kyme give him up. But we, though we fear the power of the Persians, yet have not ventured up to this time to deliver to them the suppliant, until thy counsel shall be clearly manifested to us, saying which of the two things we ought to do. He thus inquired, but the god again declared to them the same answer, bidding them deliver up Pactyus to the Persians. Upon this Aristodicus with deliberate purpose did as follows. He went all round the temple destroying the nests of the sparrows 161, and of all the other kinds of birds which had been hatched on the temple. And while he was doing this, it is said that a voice came from the inner shrine directed to Aristodicus and speaking thus. Thou most impious of men! Why dost thou dare to do this? Dost thou carry away by force from my temple the suppliants for my protection? And Aristodicus, it is said, not being at all at a loss replied to this. Lord, dost thou thus come to the assistance of thy suppliants, and yet biddest the men of Kyme deliver up theirs? And the god answered him again thus. Yea, I bid you do so, that ye may perish the more quickly for your impiety, so that ye may not at any future time come to the oracle to ask about delivering up of suppliants. When the men of Kyme heard this saying reported, not wishing either to be destroyed by giving him up or to be besieged by keeping him with them, they sent him away to Mytilene. Those of Mytilene, however, when Mazars sent messages to them, were preparing to deliver up Pactyus for a price, but what the price was I cannot say for certain, since the bargain was never completed, for the men of Kyme, when they learnt that this was being done by the Mytileneans, sent a vessel to Lesbos and conveyed away Pactyus to Chios. After this he was dragged forcibly from the temple of Athene Poliuchos by the Chians and delivered up. And the Chians delivered him up, receiving Atarneus in return. Now this Atarneus is a region of Mysia opposition Lesbos. So the Persians, having received Pactyus, kept him under guard, meaning to produce him before Cyrus. And the long time elapsed during which none of the Chians either used barley meal grown in this region of Atarneus for pouring out in sacrifice to any god, or baked cakes for offering of the corn which grew there, but all the produce of this land was excluded from every kind of sacred service. The men of Chios had then delivered up Pactyus, and after this Mazars made expedition against those who had joined in besieging Tabelos. And first he reduced to slavery those of Priam, then he overran the whole plain of the Maeander, making spoil of it for his army, and Magnesia in the same manner. And straightway after this he fell sick and died. After he was dead, Harpagos came down to take his place in command, being also a Mede by race. This was the man whom the king of the Medes Astyages feasted with the unlawful banquet, and who helped to give the kingdom to Cyrus. This man, being appointed commander then by Cyrus, came to Ionia and proceeded to take the cities by throwing up mounds against them. For when he had enclosed any people within their walls, then he threw up mounds against the walls and took their city by storm. And the first city of Ionia upon which he made an attempt was Phocaea. Now these Phocaeans were the first of the Hellenes who made long voyages, and these are they who discovered the Adriatic and Tersinia and Iberia and Tartessos. And they made voyages not in round ships, but in vessels of 50 oars. These came to Tartessos and became friends with the king of the Tartessians, whose name was Arganthonios. He was ruler of the Tartessians for 80 years and lived in all 120. With this man, I say, the Phocaeans became so exceedingly friendly that first he bade them leave Ionia and dwell wherever they desired in his own land. And as he did not prevail upon the Phocaeans to do this, afterwards, hearing from them of the Mede how his power was increasing, he gave them money to build a wall about their city. And he did this without sparing, for the circuit of the wall is many furlongs 163 in extent. And it is built all of large stones closely fitted together. The wall of the Phocaeans was made in this manner. And Harpagos, having marched his army against them, began to besiege them, at the same time holding forth to them proposals, and saying that it was enough to satisfy him if the Phocaeans were willing to throw down one battlement of their wall and dedicate one single house. 164 But the Phocaeans, being very greatly grieved at the thought of subjection, said that they wished to deliberate about the matter for one day, and after that they would give their answer, and they asked him to withdraw his army from the wall while they were deliberating. Harpagos said that he knew very well what they were meaning to do, nevertheless he was willing to allow them to deliberate. So in the time that followed, when Harpagos had withdrawn his army from the wall, the Phocaeans drew down their 50 oared galleys to the sea, put into them their children and women and all their movable goods, and besides them the images out of the temples and the other votive offerings, except such as were made of bronze or stone or consisted of paintings. All the rest, I say, they put into the ships. And having embarked themselves they sailed towards Chios, and the Persians obtained possession of Phocaea, the city being deserted of the inhabitants. But as for the Phocaeans, since the men of Chios would not sell them at their request the islands called Anusai, from the fear lest these islands might be made a seat of trade and their island might be shut out, therefore they set out for Kurnos. 165 For in Kurnos 20 years before this they had established a city named Eulalia, in accordance with an oracle. Now Arganthonios by that time was dead. And when they were setting out for Kurnos they first sailed to Phocaea and slaughtered the Persian garrison, to whose charge Harpagos had delivered the city. Then after they had achieved this, they made solemn imprecations on any one of them who should be left behind from their voyage, and moreover, they sank a mass of iron in the sea, and swore that not until that mass should appear again on the surface. 166 would they return to Phocaea. However, as they were setting forth to Kurnos, more than half of the citizens were seized with yearning and regret for their city and for their native land, and they proved false to their oath and sailed back to Phocaea. But those of them who kept the oath still weighed anchor from the islands of Anusai and sailed. When these came to Kurnos, for 5 years they dwelt together with those who had come thither before, and they founded temples there. Then, since they plundered the property of all their neighbors, the Tersenians and Carthaginians 167 made expedition against them by agreement with one another, each with 60 ships. And the Phocaeans also manned their vessels, 60 in number, and came to meet the enemy in that which is called the Sardinian Sea. And when they encountered one another in the sea fight, the Phocaeans won a kind of Cadmean victory, for 40 of their ships were destroyed, and the remaining 20 were disabled, having had their prows bent aside. So they sailed into Eulalia and took up their children and their women and their other possessions, as much as their ships proved capable of carrying, and then they left Kurnos behind them and sailed to Rhegium. But as for the crews of the ships that were destroyed, The Carthaginians and Tersenians obtained much the greater number of them, 168, and these they brought to land and killed by stoning. After this the men of Agylla found that everything which passed by the spot where the Phocaeans were laid after being stoned became either distorted, or crippled, or paralyzed, both small cattle and beasts of burden and human creatures. So the men of Agylla sent to Delphi desiring to purge themselves of the offense, and the Pythian prophetess bade them do that which the men of Agylla still continue to perform, that is to say, they make great sacrifices in honor of the dead, and hold at the place a contest of athletics and horse racing. These then of the Phocaeans had the fate which I have said, but those of them who took refuge at Trajan started from thence, and took possession of that city in the land of Anatria, which now is called Hyel. This they founded, having learned from a man of Posidonia that the Pythian prophetess by her answer meant them to found a temple to Kurnos, who was a hero, and not to found a settlement in the island of Kurnos. 169 About Phocaea in Ionia it happened thus, and nearly the same thing also was done by the men of Teos. For as soon as Harpagos took their wall with a mound, they embarked in their ships and sailed straightway for Thrace, and there they founded the city of Abdera, which before them Timesios of Clazomenae founded and had no profit therefrom, but was driven out by the Thracians, and now he is honored as a hero by the Teans in Abdera. These alone of all the Ionians left their native cities because they would not endure subjection. But the other Ionians except the Milesians did indeed contend in arms with Harpagos like those who left their homes, and proved themselves brave men, fighting each for his own native city, but when they were defeated and captured, they remained all in their own place, and performed that which was laid upon them. But the Milesians, as I have also said before, had made a sworn agreement with Cyrus himself and kept still. Thus for the second time Ionia had been reduced to subjection. And when Harpagos had conquered the Ionians on the mainland, then the Ionians who dwelt in the islands, being struck with fear by these things, gave themselves over to Cyrus. When the Ionians had been thus evilly entreated but were continuing still to hold their gatherings as before at the Pannonian, Bias a man of Priene set forth to the Ionians, as I am informed, a most profitable counsel, by following which they might have been the most prosperous of all the Hellenes. He urged that the Ionians should set forth in one common expedition and sail to Sardinia, and after that found a single city for all the Ionians. And thus they would escape subjection and would be prosperous, inhabiting the largest of all islands and being rulers over others, whereas, if they remained in Ionia, he did not perceive, he said, that freedom would any longer exist for them. This was the counsel given by Bias of Priene after the Ionians had been ruined, but a good counsel too was given before the ruin of Ionia by Thales, a man of Miletos, who was by descent of Phoenician race. He advised the Ionians to have one single seat of government, 170, and that this should be at Teos, for Teos, he said, was in the center of Ionia, and that the other cities should be inhabited as before, but accounted just as if they were demes. These men set forth to them counsels of the kind which I have said. But Harpagos, after subduing Ionia, proceeded to march against the Carians and Caunians and Lycians, taking also Ionians and Aeolians to help him. Of these the Carians came to the mainland from the islands, for being of old time subjects of Minos and being called Leleges, they used to dwell in the islands, paying no tribute, so far back as I am able to arrive by hearsay, But whenever Minos required it, they used to supply his ships with seamen. And as Minos subdued much land and was fortunate in his fighting, the Carian nation was of all nations by much the most famous at that time together with him. And they produced 3 inventions of which the Hellenes adopted the use, that is to say, the Carians were those who first set the fashion of fastening crests on helmets, and of making the devices which are put onto shields, and these also were the first who made handles for their shields, whereas up to that time, all who were wont to use shields carried them without handles, and with leathern straps to guide them, having them hung about their necks and their left shoulders. Then after the lapse of a long time the Dorians and Ionians drove the Carians out of the islands, and so they came to the mainland. With respect to the Carians, the Cretans relate that it happened thus. The Carians themselves, however, do not agree with this account, but suppose that they are dwellers on the mainland from the beginning, and that they went always by the same name which they have now. And they point as evidence of this to an ancient temple of Carian Zeus at Mylasa, in which the Mysians and Lydians share as being brother races of the Carians. For they say that Lytos and Mysos were brothers of Car, these share in it, but those who being of another race have come to speak the same language as the Carians, these have no share in it. It seems to me, however, that the Caunians are dwellers there from the beginning, though they say themselves that they came from Crete. But they have been assimilated to the Carian race in language, or else the Carians to the Caunian race, I cannot with certainty determine which. They have customs, however, in which they differ very much from all other men as well as from the Carians. For example, the fairest thing in their estimation is to meet together in numbers for drinking, according to equality of age or friendship, both men, women, and children. And again, when they had founded temples for foreign deities, afterwards they changed their purpose and resolved to worship only their own native gods. And the whole body of Caunian young men put on their armor and made pursuit as far as the borders of the Calindians, beating the air with their spears, and they said that they were casting the foreign gods out of the land. Such are the customs which these have. The Lycians, however, have sprung originally from Crete, for in old time the whole of Crete was possessed by barbarians. And when the sons of Europa, Sarpedon and Minos, came to be at variance in Crete about the kingdom, Minos, having got the better in the strife of parties, drove out both Sarpedon himself and those of his party. And they, having been expelled, came to the land of Milyas in Asia. For the land which now the Lycians inhabit was anciently called Milyas, and the Mylians were then called Solomoi. Now while Sarpedon reigned over them, they were called by the name which they had when they came thither, and by which the Lycians are even now called by the neighboring tribes, namely Termali. But when from Athens Lycos the son of Pandion came to the land of the Termali and to Sarpedon, he too, having been driven out by his brother namely Aegeus, then by the name taken from Lycos, they were called after a time Lycians. The customs which these have are partly Cretan and partly Carian, but one custom they have which is peculiar to them, and in which they agree with no other people, that is, they call themselves by their mothers and not by their fathers, and if one asks his neighbor who he is, he will state his parentage on the mother's side, and enumerate his mother's female ascendants. And if a woman who is a citizen marry a slave, the children are accounted to be of gentle birth, but if a man who is a citizen, though he were the first man among them, have a slave for wife or concubine, the children are without civil rights. Now the Carians were reduced to subjection by Harpagos without any brilliant deed displayed either by the Carians themselves or by those of the Hellenes who dwell in this land. Of these last there are besides others the men of Cnidos, settlers from Lacedaemon, whose land runs out into the sea, 173 being in fact a region which is called Triopian, beginning from the peninsula of Babassos. And since all the land of Cnidos except a small part is washed by the sea, for the part of it which looks towards the north is bounded by the Gulf of Karamos, and that which looks to the south by the sea off Sim and Rhodes. Therefore the men of Cnidos began to dig through this small part, which is about 5 furlongs across, while Harpagos was subduing Ionia, desiring to make their land an island. And within the isthmus all was theirs, for where the territory of Cnidos ends in the direction of the mainland, here is the isthmus which they were digging across. And while the Cnidians were working at it with a great number of men, it was perceived that the men who worked suffered injury much more than might have been expected, and in a more supernatural manner, both in other parts of their bodies, and especially in their eyes, when the rock was being broken up. So they sent men to ask the oracle at Delphi what the cause of the difficulty was. And the Pythian prophetess, as the men of Cnidos themselves report, gave them this reply in trimeter verse. Fence not the place with towers, nor dig the isthmus through. Zeus would have made your land an island, had he willed. When the Pythian prophetess had given this oracle, the men of Cnidos not only ceased from their digging, but delivered themselves to Harpagos without resistance, when he came against them with his army. There were also the Pedasians, who dwelt in the inland country above Halicarnassos, and among these, whenever anything hurtful is about to happen either to themselves or to their neighbors, the priestess of Athene has a great beard. This befell them 3 times. These of all about Caria were the only men who held out for any time against Harpagos, and they gave him trouble more than any other people, having fortified a mountain called Lyde. After a time the Pedasians were conquered, and the Lycians, when Harpagos marched his army into the plain of Xanthos, came out against him and fought, few against many, and displayed proofs of valor, but being defeated and confined within their city, they gathered together into the citadel their wives and their children, their property and their servants, and after that they set fire to this citadel, so that it was all in flames. And having done so and sworn terrible oaths with one another, they went forth against the enemy and were slain in fight, that is to say all the men of Xanthos. And of the Xanthians who now claim to be Lycians, the greater number have come in from abroad, except only 80 households, but these 80 households happened at that time to be away from their native place, and so they escaped destruction. Thus Harpagos obtained possession of Conos, for the men of Conos imitated in most respects the behavior of the Lycians. So Harpagos was conquering the coast regions of Asia, and Cyrus himself meanwhile was doing the same in the upper parts of it, subduing every nation and passing over none. Now most of these actions I shall pass over in silence, but the undertakings which gave him trouble more than the rest, and which are the most worthy of note, of these I shall make mention. Cyrus, so soon as he had made subject to himself all other parts of the mainland, proceeded to attack the Assyrians. Now Assyria has doubtless many other great cities, but the most famous and the strongest, and the place where the seat of their monarchy had been established after Nineveh was destroyed, was Babylon, which was a city such as I shall say. It lies in a great plain, and in size it is such that each face measures 120 furlongs, 177, the shape of the whole being square. Thus the furlongs of the circuit of the city amount in all to 480. Such is the size of the city of Babylon, and it had a magnificence greater than all other cities of which we have knowledge. First there runs round it a trench deep and broad and full of water, then a wall 50 royal cubits in thickness and 200 cubits in height. Now the royal cubit is larger by 3 fingers than the common cubit. I must also tell in addition to this for what purpose the earth was used, which was taken out of the trench, and in what manner the wall was made. As they dug the trench they made the earth which was carried out of the excavation into bricks, and having molded enough bricks they baked them in kilns, and then afterwards, using hot asphalt for mortar, and inserting reed mats at every 30 courses of brickwork. They built up first the edges of the trench and then the wall itself in the same manner. And at the top of the wall along the edges they built chambers of 1 story facing one another, and between the rows of chambers they left space to drive a 4-horse chariot. In the circuit of the wall there are set 100 gates made of bronze throughout, and the gate posts and lintels likewise. Now there is another city distant from Babylon, a space of 8 days' journey, of which the name is, and there is a river there of no great size, and the name of the river is also is, and it sends its stream into the river Euphrates. This river is throws up together with its water lumps of asphalt in great abundance, and thence was brought the asphalt for the wall of Babylon. Babylon then was walled in this manner, and there are 2 divisions of the city, for a river whose name is Euphrates parts it in the middle. This flows from the land of the Armenians and is large and deep and swift, and it flows out into the Erythraean Sea. The wall then on each side has its bends 179 carried down to the river, and from this point the return walls stretch along each bank of the stream, in the form of a rampart of baked bricks. And the city itself is full of houses of 3 and 4 stories, and the roads by which it is cut up run in straight lines, including the cross roads which lead to the river, and opposite to each road, there were set gates in the rampart which ran along the river, in many in number as the ways, 180, and these also were of bronze, and led like the ways 181 to the river itself. This wall then which I have mentioned is as it were a cuirass 182 for the town, and another wall runs round within it, not much weaker for defense than the first, but enclosing a smaller space. 183, and in each division of the city was a building in the midst, in the one the king's palace of great extent and strongly fortified round, and in the other the temple of Zeus Bellows with bronze gates, and this exists still up to my time and measures 2 furlongs each way, 184 being of a square shape. And in the midst of the temple 185 is built a solid tower measuring a furlong both in length and in breadth. And on this tower another tower has been erected, and another again upon this, and so on up to the number of 8 towers. An ascent to these has been built running outside round about all the towers, and when one reaches about the middle of the ascent, one finds a stopping place and seats to rest upon, on which those who ascend sit down and rest. And on the top of the last tower there is a large cell, 186, and in the cell a large couch is laid, well covered. And by it is placed a golden table. And there is no image there set up, nor does any human being spend the night there, except only one woman of the natives of the place, whomsoever the god shall choose from all the woman, as say the Chaldeans who are the priests of this god. These same men say also, but I do not believe them, that the god himself comes often to the cell and rests upon the couch, as happens likewise in the Egyptian Thebes, according to the report of the Egyptians, for there also a woman sleeps in the temple of the Theban Zeus, and both these women are said to abstain from commerce with men, and as happens also with the prophetess of the god in Patara of Lycia, whenever there is one. For there is not always an oracle there, but whenever there is one, then she is shut up during the nights in the temple within the cell. There is moreover in the temple at Babylon another cell below, wherein is a great image of Zeus sitting, made of gold, and by it is placed a large table of gold, and his footstool and seat are of gold also, and, as the Chaldeans reported, the weight of the gold of which these things are made is 800 talents. Outside this cell is an altar of gold, and there is also another altar of great size, where full-grown animals 188 are sacrificed, whereas on the golden altar, it is not lawful to sacrifice any but young sucklings only. And also on the larger altar the Chaldeans offer 1,000 talents of frankincense every year at the time when they celebrate the feast in honor of this god. There was moreover in these precincts still remaining at the time of Cyrus, a statue 12 cubits high, of gold and solid. This I did not myself see, but that which is related by the Chaldeans I relate. Against this statue Darius the son of Histus formed a design, but he did not venture to take it. It was taken however by Xerxes the son of Darius, who also killed the priest when he forbade him to meddle with the statue. This temple, then, is thus adorned with magnificence, and there are also many private votive offerings. Of this Babylon, besides many other rulers, of whom I shall make mention in the Assyrian history, and who added improvement to the walls and temples, there were also 2 who were women. Of these, the one who ruled first, named Semiramis, who lived 5 generations before the other, produced banks of earth in the plain which are a sight worth seeing, and before this the river used to flood like a sea over the whole plain. The queen who lived after her time, named Nitocris, was wiser than she who had reigned before, and in the first place she left behind her monuments which I shall tell of. Then secondly, seeing that the monarchy of the Medes was great and not apt to remain still, but that besides other cities, even Nineveh had been captured by it, she made provision against it in so far as she was able. First, as regards the river Euphrates which flows through the midst of their city, whereas before this it flowed straight, she by digging channels above, made it so winding that it actually comes 3 times in its course to one of the villages in Assyria, and the name of the village to which the Euphrates comes is Artarica. And at this day those who travel from this sea of ours to Babylon, in their voyage down the river Euphrates, 18,901 arrive 3 times at this same village and on 3 separate days. This she did thus, and she also piled up a mound along each bank of the river, which is worthy to cause wonder for its size and height. And at a great distance above Babylon, she dug a basin for a lake, which she caused to extend along at a very small distance from the river, excavating it everywhere of such depth as to come to water, and making the extent such that the circuit of it measured 420 furlongs. And the earth which was dug out of this excavation she used up by piling it in mounds along the banks of the river. And when this had been dug by her she brought stones and set them all round it as a facing wall. Both these 2 things she did, That is, she made the river to have a winding course, and she made the place which was dug out all into a swamp, in order that the river might run more slowly, having its force broken by going round many bends, and that the voyages might be winding to Babylon, and after the voyages there might succeed a long circuit of the pool. These works she carried out in that part where the entrance to the country was, and the shortest way to it from Media, so that the Medes might not have dealings with her kingdom and learn of her affairs. These defenses she cast round her city from the depth, and she made the following addition which was dependent upon them. The city was in 2 divisions, and the river occupied the space between, and in the time of the former rulers, when any one wished to pass over from the one division to the other, he had to pass over in a boat, and that, as I imagine, was troublesome. She however made provision also for this, for when she was digging the basin for the lake she left this other monument of herself derived from the same work, that is, she caused stones to be cut of very great length, and when the stones were prepared for her and the place had been dug out, she turned aside the whole stream of the river into the place which she had been digging, and while this was being filled with water, the ancient bed of the river being dried up in the meantime, she both built up with baked bricks after the same fashion as the wall the edges of the river, where it flows through the city, and the places of descent leading from the small gateways to the river, and also about the middle of the city, as I judge, with the stones which she had caused to be dug out, she proceeded to build a bridge, binding together the stones with iron and lead. And upon the top she laid squared timbers across, to remain there while it was daytime, over which the people of Babylon made the passage across, but at night they used to take away these timbers for this reason, namely that they might not go backwards and forwards by night, and steal from one another. And when the place dug out had been made into a lake full of water by the river, and at the same time the bridge had been completed, then she conducted the Euphrates back into its ancient channel from the lake, and so the place dug out being made into a swamp, was thought to have served a good purpose, and there had been a bridge set up for the men of the city. This same queen also contrived a snare of the following kind. Over that gate of the city through which the greatest number of people passed, she set up for herself a tomb above the very gate itself. And on the tomb she engraved writing which said thus: "If any of the kings of Babylon who come after me shall be in want of wealth, let him open my tomb and take as much as he desires, but let him not open it for any other cause, if he be not in want, for that will not be well." This tomb was undisturbed until the kingdom came to Darius, but to Darius, it seemed that it was a monstrous thing not to make any use of this gate, and also, when there was money lying there, not to take it, considering that the money itself invited him to do so. Now the reason why he would not make any use of this gate was because the corpse would have been above his head as he drove through. He then, I say, opened the tomb and found not indeed money but the corpse, with writing which said thus: "If thou hadst not been insatiable of wealth and basely covetous, thou wouldest not have opened the resting places of the dead." This queen then is reported to have been such as I have described, and it was the son of this woman, bearing the same name as his father, Labanetos, and being ruler over the Assyrians, against whom Cyrus was marching. Now the great king makes his marches not only well furnished from home with provisions for his table and with cattle, but also taking with him water from the river Chospes, which flows by Susa, of which alone and of no other river the king drinks. And of this water of the chosps boiled, a very great number of wagons, four-wheeled and drawn by mules, carry a supply in silver vessels, and go with him wherever he may march at any time. Now when Cyrus on his way towards Babylon arrived at the river Gins, of which river the springs are in the mountains of the Madianians, and it flows through the Dardanians and runs into another river, the Tigris, which flowing by the city of Opis, runs out into the Erythraean Sea. When Cyrus, I say, was endeavoring to cross this river Gins, which is a navigable stream, then one of his sacred white horses in high spirit and wantonness went into the river and endeavored to cross, but the stream swept it under water and carried it off forthwith. And Cyrus was greatly moved with anger against the river for having done thus insolently, and he threatened to make it so feeble that for the future, even women could cross it easily without wetting the knee. So after this threat he ceased from his march against Babylon and divided his army into two parts, and having divided it, he stretched lines and marked out straight channels, 180 on each bank of the Gins, directed every way, and having disposed his army along them he commanded them to dig. So, as a great multitude was working, the work was completed indeed, but they spent the whole summer season at this spot working. When Cyrus had taken vengeance on the river Gins by dividing it into 360 channels, and when the next spring was just beginning, then at length he continued his advance upon Babylon. And the men of Babylon had marched forth out of their city and were awaiting him. So when in his advance he came near to the city, the Babylonians joined battle with him, and having been worsted in the fight, they were shut up close within their city. But knowing well even before this that Cyrus was not apt to remain still, and seeing him lay hands on every nation equally, they had brought in provisions beforehand for very many years. So while these made no account of the siege, Cyrus was in straits what to do, for much time went by, and his affairs made no progress onwards. Therefore, whether it was some other man who suggested it to him when he was in a strait what to do, or whether he of himself perceived what he ought to do, he did as follows. The main body of his army he posted at the place where the river runs into the city, and then again behind the city he set others, where the river issues forth from the city, and he proclaimed to his army that so soon as they should see that the stream had become passable, they should enter by this way into the city. Having thus set them in their places and in this manner exhorted them, he marched away himself with that part of his army which was not fit for fighting. And when he came to the lake, Cyrus also did the same things which the queen of the Babylonians had done as regards the river and the lake, that is to say, he conducted the river by a channel into the lake, which was at that time a swamp, and so made the former course of the river passable by the sinking of the stream. When this had been done in such a manner, the Persians who had been posted for this very purpose entered by the bed of the river Euphrates into Babylon, the stream having sunk so far that it reached about to the middle of a man's thigh. Now if the Babylonians had had knowledge of it beforehand or had perceived that which was being done by Cyrus, they would have allowed 196 the Persians to enter the city, and then destroyed them miserably, for if they had closed all the gates that led to the river, and mounted themselves upon the ramparts which were carried along the banks of the stream, they would have caught them as it were in a fish wheel. But as it was, the Persians came upon them unexpectedly, and owing to the size of the city, so it is said by those who dwell there, after those about the extremities of the city had suffered capture, those Babylonians who dwelt in the middle, did not know that they had been captured, but as they chanced to be holding a festival, they went on dancing and rejoicing during this time, until they learned the truth only too well. Babylon then had thus been taken for the first time. And as to the resources of the Babylonians, how great they are, I shall show by many other proofs, and among them also by this. For the support of the great king and his army, apart from the regular tribute, the whole land of which he is ruler has been distributed into portions. Now whereas 12 months go to make up the year, for 4 of these, he has his support from the territory of Babylon, and for the remaining 8 months from the whole of the rest of Asia. Thus the Assyrian land is in regard to resources the third part of all Asia. And the government, or satrapy as it is called by the Persians, of this territory is of all the governments by far the best, seeing that when Tritantachum son of Artabazos had this province from the king, there came into him every day an artab full of silver coin. Now the artab is a Persian measure, and holds more than the medimnos of Attica by 3 Attic choinics, and of horses he had in this province as his private property, apart from the horses for use in war. 800 stallions and 16,000 mares, for each of these stallions served 20 mares. Of Indian hounds moreover such a vast number were kept that 4 large villages in the plain, being free from other contributions, had been appointed to provide food for the hounds. Such was the wealth which belonged to the ruler of Babylon. Now the land of the Assyrians has but little rain, and this little gives nourishment to the root of the corn, but the crop is ripened, and the ear comes on by the help of watering from the river, not as in Egypt by the coming up of the river itself over the fields, but the crop is watered by hand or with swing buckets. For the whole Babylonian territory, like the Egyptian, is cut up into channels, and the largest of the channels is navigable for ships and runs in the direction of the sun rising in winter from the Euphrates to another river, namely the Tigris, along the bank of which lay the city of Nineveh. This territory is of all that we know the best by far for producing corn. 198 as to trees, 199, it does not even attempt to bear them, either fig or vine or olive, but for producing corn, it is so good that it returns as much as 200-fold for the average, and when it bears at its best, it produces 300-fold. The leaves of the wheat and barley there grow to be full 4 fingers broad, and from millet and sesame seed how large a tree grows, I know myself but shall not record, being well aware that even what has already been said relating to the crops produced has been enough to cause disbelief in those who have not visited the Babylonian land. They use no oil of olives, but only that which they make of sesame seed, and they have date palms growing over all the plain, most of them fruit-bearing, of which they make both solid food and wine and honey, and to these they attend in the same manner as to fig trees, and in particular they take the fruit of those palms which the Hellenes call male palms, and tie them upon the date-bearing palms, so that their gallfly may enter into the date and ripen it, and that the fruit of the palm may not fall off. For the male palm produces gallflies in its fruit just as the wild fig does. But the greatest marvel of all the things in the land after the city itself, to my mind, is this which I am about to tell. Their boats, those I mean which go down the river to Babylon, are round and all of leather. For they make ribs for them of willow which they cut in the land of the Armenians who dwell above the Assyrians, and round these they stretch hides which serve as a covering outside by way of hull, not making broad the stern nor gathering in the prow to a point, but making the boats round like a shield. And after that they stow the whole boat with straw, and suffer it to be carried down the stream full of cargo. And for the most part these boats bring down casks of palm wood 200 filled with wine. The boat is kept straight by 2 steering oars and 2 men standing upright, and the man inside pulls his oar, while the man outside pushes. 201 These vessels are made both of very large size and also smaller, the largest of them having a burden of as much as 5,000 talents weight, and in each one there is a live ass, and in those of larger size several. So when they have arrived at Babylon in their voyage and have disposed of their cargo, they sell by auction the ribs of the boat and all the straw, but they pack the hides upon their asses and drive them off to Armenia. For up the stream of the river it is not possible by any means to sail, owing to the swiftness of the current, and for this reason they make their boats not of timber, but of hides. Then when they have come back to the land of the Armenians, driving their asses with them, they make other boats in the same manner. Such are their boats, and the following is the manner of dress which they use, namely a linen tunic reaching to the feet, and over this they put on another of wool, and then a white mantle thrown round, while they have shoes of a native fashion, rather like the Boeotian slippers. They wear their hair long and bind their heads round with fillets, and they are anointed over the whole of their body with perfumes. Each man has a seal and a staff carved by hand, and on each staff is carved either an apple or a rose or a lily or an eagle or some other device, for it is not their custom to have a staff without a device upon it. Such is the equipment of their bodies. And the customs which are established among them are as follows, the wisest in our opinion being this, which I am informed that the Enetoi and Illyria also have. In every village once in each year it was done as follows. When the maidens grew to the age for marriage, they gathered these all together and brought them in a body to one place, and round them stood a company of men. And the crier caused each one severally to stand up, and proceeded to sell them, first the most comely of all, and afterwards, when she had been sold and had fetched a large sum of money, he would put up another who was the most comely after her. And they were sold for marriage. Now all the wealthy men of the Babylonians who were ready to marry vied with one another in bidding for the most beautiful maidens. Those however of the common sort who were ready to marry did not require a fine form, but they would accept money together with less comely maidens. For when the crier had made an end of selling the most comely of the maidens, then he would cause to stand up that one who was least shapely, or any one of them who might be crippled in any way, and he would make proclamation of her, asking who was willing for least gold to have her in marriage, until she was assigned to him who was willing to accept least. And the gold would be got from the sale of the comely maidens. And so those of beautiful form provided dowries for those which were unshapely or crippled, but to give in marriage one's own daughter to whomsoever each man would, was not allowed, nor to carry off the maiden after buying her without a surety, for it was necessary for the man to provide sureties that he would marry her before he took her away, and if they did not agree well together, the law was laid down that he should pay back the money. It was allowed also for anyone who wished it to come from another village and buy. This then was their most honorable custom. It does not however still exist at the present time, but they have found out of late another way, in order that the men may not ill-treat them or take them to another city. For since the time when being conquered they were oppressed and ruined, Each one of the common people, when he is in want of livelihood, prostitutes his female children. Next in wisdom to that is this other custom which was established among them. They bear out the sick into the marketplace, for of physicians they make no use. So people come up to the sick man and give advice about his disease. If anyone himself has ever suffered anything like that which the sick man has, or saw any other who had suffered it, and coming near they advise and recommend those means by which they themselves got rid of a like disease, or seen some other get rid of it. And to pass by the sick man in silence is not permitted to them, nor until one has asked what disease he has. They bury their dead in honey, and their modes of lamentation are similar to those used in Egypt. And whenever a Babylonian man has intercourse with his wife, he sits by incense offered, and his wife does the same on the other side. And when it is morning they wash themselves, both of them, for they will touch no vessel until they have washed themselves. And the Arabians do likewise in this matter. Now the most shameful of the customs of the Babylonians is as follows. Every woman of the country must sit down in the precincts of Aphrodite once in her life, and have commerce with a man who is a stranger. And many women who do not deign to mingle with the rest, because they are made arrogant by wealth, drive to the temple with pairs of horses in covered carriages, and so take their place. And a large number of attendants follow after them, but the greater number do thus in the sacred enclosure of Aphrodite, sit great numbers of women with a wreath of cord about their heads, some come and others go, and there are passages in straight lines going between the women in every direction, through which the strangers pass by and make their choice. Here when a woman takes her seat she does not depart again to her house, until one of the strangers has thrown a silver coin into her lap, and has had commerce with her outside the temple, and after throwing it, he must say these words only. I demand thee in the name of the goddess Melita. Now Melita is the name given by the Assyrians to Aphrodite. And the silver coin may be of any value, whatever it is she will not refuse it. For that is not lawful for her, seeing that this coin is made sacred by the act. And she follows the man who has first thrown and does not reject any. And after that she departs to her house, having acquitted herself of her duty to the goddess, nor will you be able thenceforth to give any gift so great as to win her. So then as many as have attained to beauty and stature are speedily released, but those of them who are unshapely remain there much time, not being able to fulfill the law, for some of them remain even as much as 3 or 4 years. And in some parts of Cyprus too there is a custom similar to this. These customs then are established among the Babylonians. And there are of them 3 tribes which eat nothing but fish only. And when they have caught them and dried them in the sun, they do thus: they throw them into brine, and then pound them with pestles and strain them through muslin, and they have them for food, either kneaded into a soft cake, or baked like bread, according to their liking. When this nation also had been subdued by Cyrus, he had a desire to bring the Massagetæ into subjection to himself. This nation is reputed to be both great and warlike, and to dwell towards the east and the sun rising, beyond the river Araxes and over against the Isidonians. And some also say that this nation is of Scythian race. Now the Araxes is said by some to be larger and by others to be smaller than the Ister. And they say that there are many islands in it about equal in size to Lesbos, and in them people dwelling who feed in the summer upon roots of all kinds which they dig up, and certain fruits from trees, which have been discovered by them for food, they store up, it is said, in the season when they are ripe and feed upon them in the winter. Moreover, it is said that other trees have been discovered by them which yield fruit of such a kind, that when they have assembled together in companies in the same place and lighted a fire, they sit round in a circle and throw some of it into the fire, and they smell the fruit which is thrown on, as it burns, and are intoxicated by the scent, as the Hellenes are with wine, and when more of the fruit is thrown on they become more intoxicated, until at last they rise up to dance and begin to sing. This is said to be their manner of living. And as to the river Araxes, it flows from the land of the Madianians, whence flows the Jinns which Cyrus divided into the 360 channels, and it discharges itself by 40 branches, of which all except one end in swamps and shallow pools, and among them they say that men dwell who feed on fish eaten raw, and who are wont to use as clothing the skins of seals. But the one remaining branch of the Araxes flows with unimpeded course into the Caspian Sea. Now the Caspian Sea is apart by itself, not having connection with the other sea. For all that sea which the Hellenes navigate, and the sea beyond the Pillars, which is called Atlantis, and the Erythraean Sea are in fact all one, but the Caspian is separate and lies apart by itself. In length it is a voyage of 15 days if one uses oars, 214, and in breadth, where it is broadest, a voyage of 8 days. On the side towards the west of this sea the Caucasus runs along by it, which is of all mountain ranges both the greatest in extent and the loftiest. And the Caucasus has many various races of men dwelling in it, living for the most part on the wild produce of the forests, and among them there are said to be trees which produce leaves of such a kind, that by pounding them and mixing water with them, they paint figures upon their garments. And the figures do not wash out, but grow old with the woolen stuff, as if they had been woven into it at the first. And men say that the sexual intercourse of these people is open like that of cattle. On the west then of this sea, which is called Caspian, the Caucasus is the boundary, while towards the east and the rising sun, a plain succeeds which is of limitless extent to the view. Of this great plain then the Massagetae occupy a large part, against whom Cyrus had become eager to march, for there were many strong reasons which incited him to it, and urged him onwards. First, the manner of his birth, that is to say the opinion held of him that he was more than a mere mortal man, and next the success which he had met with in his wars, for whithersoever Cyrus directed his march, it was impossible for that nation to escape. Now the ruler of the Massagetae was a woman, who was queen after the death of her husband, and her name was Tomris. To her Cyrus sent and wooed her, pretending that he desired to have her for his wife. But Tomris, understanding that he was wooing not herself, but rather the kingdom of the Massagetae, rejected his approaches. And Cyrus after this, as he made no progress by craft, marched to the Araxes, and proceeded to make an expedition openly against the Massagetae, forming bridges of boats over the river for his army to cross, and building towers upon the vessels which gave them passage across the river. While he was busied about this labor, Tomris sent a herald and said thus: "O King of the Medes, cease to press forward the work which thou art now pressing forward, for thou canst not tell whether these things will be in the end for thy advantage or no. Cease to do so, I say, and be king over thine own people, and endure to see us ruling those whom we rule. Since however I know that thou wilt not be willing to receive this counsel, but dost choose anything rather than to be at rest, therefore if thou art greatly anxious to make trial of the Massagetae and fight, Come now, leave that labor which thou hast in yawking together the banks of the river, and cross over into our land. When we have first withdrawn 3 days' journey from the river. Or if thou desirest rather to receive us into your land, do thou the same thing thyself. Having heard this, Cyrus called together the first men among the Persians, and having gathered these together, he laid the matter before them for discussion, asking their advice as to which of the 2 things he should do. And their opinions all agreed in one, bidding him receive Tomris and her army into his country. But Croesus the Lydian, being present and finding fault with this opinion, declared an opinion opposite to that which had been set forth, saying as follows: O king, I told thee in former time also, that since Zeus had given me over to thee, I would avert according to my power whatever occasion of falling I might see coming near thy house. And now my sufferings, which have been bitter, 216, have proved to be lessons of wisdom to me. If thou dost suppose that thou art immortal, and that thou dost command an army which is also immortal, it will be of no use for me to declare to thee my judgment. But if thou hast perceived that thou art a mortal man thyself and dost command others who are so likewise, then learn this first, that for the affairs of men there is a revolving wheel, and that this in its revolution suffers not the same persons always to have good fortune. I therefore now have an opinion about the matter laid before us, which is opposite to that of these men. For if we shall consent to receive the enemy into our land, there is for thee this danger in so doing. If thou shalt be worsted, thou wilt lose in addition all thy realm. For it is evident that if the Messagetai are victors, they will not turn back and fly, but will march upon the provinces of thy realm. And on the other hand, if thou shalt be the victor, thou wilt not be victor so fully as if thou shouldest overcome the Messagetai after crossing over into their land and shouldest pursue them when they fled. For against that which I said before I will set the same again here, and say that thou, when thou hast conquered, wilt march straight against the realm of Tomris. Moreover, besides that which has been said, it is a disgrace and not to be endured that Cyrus the son of Cambyses should yield to a woman, and so withdraw from her land. Now therefore it seems good to me that we should cross over and go forward from the crossing, as far as they go in their retreat, and endeavor to get the better of them by doing as follows. The Messagetai, as I am informed, are without experience of Persian good things, and have never enjoyed any great luxuries. Cut up therefore cattle without stint and dress the meat, and set out for these men a banquet in our camp. Moreover, also provide without stint bowls of unmixed wine and provisions of every kind, and having so done, leave behind the most worthless part of thy army, and let the rest begin to retreat from the camp towards the river. For if I am not mistaken in my judgment, they when they see a quantity of good things will fall to the feast. And after that it remains for us to display great deeds. These were the conflicting opinions, and Cyrus, letting go the former opinion and choosing that of Croesus, gave notice to Tomris to retire, as he was intending to cross over to her. She then proceeded to retire, as she had at first engaged to do. But Cyrus delivered Croesus into the hands of his son Cambyses, to whom he meant to give the kingdom, and gave him charge earnestly to honor him, and to treat him well, if the crossing over to go against the Messagetai should not be prosperous. Having thus charged him and sent these away to the land of the Persians, he crossed over the river both himself and his army. And when he had passed over the Araxes, Night having come on, he saw a vision in his sleep in the land of the Massagetae, as follows. In his sleep it seemed to Cyrus that he saw the eldest of the sons of Histisps having upon his shoulders wings, and that with the one of these he overshadowed Asia, and with the other Europe. Now of Histisps the son of Arsames, who was a man of the Achaemenid clan, the eldest son was Darius, who was then, I suppose, a youth of about 20 years of age. And he had been left behind in the land of the Persians, for he was not yet of full age to go out to the wars. So then when Cyrus awoke he considered with himself concerning the vision. And as the vision seemed to him to be of great import, he called Histisps, and having taken him apart by himself he said, Histisps, thy son has been found plotting against me and against my throne. And how I know this for certain I will declare to thee. The gods have a care of me and show me beforehand all the evils that threaten me. So in the night that is past while sleeping I saw the eldest of thy sons having upon his shoulders wings, and with the one of these he overshadowed Asia and with the other Europe. To judge by this vision then, it cannot be but that he is plotting against me. Do thou therefore go by the quickest way back to Persia and take care that, when I return thither after having subdued these regions, thou set thy son before me to be examined. Cyrus said thus supposing that Darius was plotting against him, but in fact the divine powers were showing him beforehand that he was destined to find his end there, and that his kingdom was coming about to Darius. To this then Histisps replied as follows. O king, heaven forbid that there should be any man of Persian race who would plot against thee, and if there be any, I pray that he perish as quickly as may be, seeing that thou didst make the Persians to be free instead of slaves, and to rule all nations, instead of being ruled by others. And if any vision announces to thee that my son is planning rebellion against thee, I deliver him over to thee to do with him whatsoever thou wilt. Histisps then, having made answer with these words and having crossed over the Araxes, was going his way to the Persian land to keep watch over his son Darius for Cyrus. And Cyrus meanwhile went forward and made a march of 1 day from the Araxes, according to the suggestion of Croesus. After this, when Cyrus and the best part of the army of the Persians had marched back to the Araxes, and those who were unfit for fighting had been left behind, then a third part of the army of the Massagetae came to the attack and proceeded to slay, not without resistance, those who were left behind of the army of Cyrus, and seeing the feast that was set forth, when they had overcome their enemies they lay down and feasted. And being satiated with food and wine they went to sleep. Then the Persians came upon them and slew many of them, and took alive many more even than they slew, and among these the son of the queen Tomris, who was leading the army of the Massagetae, and his name was Spargapises. She then, when she heard that which had come to pass concerning the army and also the things concerning her son, sent a herald to Cyrus and said as follows. Cyrus, insatiable of blood, be not elated with pride by this which has come to pass, namely because with that fruit of the vine, with which ye fill yourselves and become so mad that as the wine descends into your bodies, evil words flowed up upon its stream because setting a snare. I say, with such a drug as this thou didst overcome my son, and not by valor in fight. Now therefore receive the word which I utter, giving thee good advice. Restore to me my son and depart from this land without penalty, triumphant over a third part of the army of the Massagetae. But if thou shalt not do so, I swear to thee by the Sun, who is Lord of the Massagetae, that surely I will give thee thy fill of blood, insatiable as thou art." When these words were reported to him, Cyrus made no account of them, and the son of the queen Tomris, Spargapises, when the wine left him, and he learnt in what evil case he was, entreated Cyrus that he might be loosed from his chains and gained his request, and then so soon as he was loosed and had got power over his hands, he put himself to death. He then ended his life in this manner, but Tomris, as Cyrus did not listen to her, gathered together all her power and joined battle with Cyrus. This battle of all the battles fought by barbarians I judge to have been the fiercest, and I am informed that it happened thus. First, it is said, they stood apart and shot at one another, and afterwards when their arrows were all shot away, they fell upon one another and engaged in close combat with their spears and daggers, and so they continued to be in conflict with one another for a long time. And neither side would flee, but at last the Massagetae got the better in the fight, and the greater part of the Persian army was destroyed there on the spot, and Cyrus himself brought his life to an end there, after he had reigned in all 30 years wanting one. Then Tomris filled a skin with human blood, and had search made among the Persian dead for the corpse of Cyrus. And when she found it, she let his head down into the skin, and doing outrage to the corpse she said at the same time this: "Though I yet live and have overcome thee in fight, nevertheless thou didst undo me by taking my son with craft. But I according to my threat will give thee thy fill of blood." Now as regards the end of the life of Cyrus there are many tales told, but this which I have related is to my mind the most worthy of belief. As to the Massagetae, they wear a dress which is similar to that of the Scythians, and they have a manner of life which is also like theirs, and there are of them horsemen and also men who do not ride on horses, for they have both fashions, and moreover, there are both archers and spearmen, and their custom it is to carry battle axes, and for everything they use either gold or bronze. For in all that has to do with spear points or arrowheads or battle axes they use bronze, but for head dresses and girdles and belts round the armpits they employ gold as ornament. And in like manner as regards their horses, they put breastplates of bronze about their chests, but on their bridles and bits and cheek pieces they employ gold. Iron, however, and silver they use not at all, for they have them not in their land, but gold and bronze in abundance. These are the customs which they have. Each marries a wife, but they have their wives in common, for that which the Hellenes say that the Scythians do is not in fact done by the Scythians, but by the Massagetae, that is to say, whatever woman a man of the Massagetae may desire, he hangs up his quiver in front of the wagon, and has commerce with her freely. They have no precise limit of age laid down for their life, but when a man becomes very old, his nearest of kin come together and slaughter him solemnly, and cattle also with him, and then after that they boil the flesh and banquet upon it. This is considered by them the happiest lot, but him who has ended his life by disease they do not eat, but cover him up in the earth, counting it a misfortune that he did not attain to being slaughtered. They sow no crops but live on cattle and on fish, which last they get in abundance from the river Araxes. Moreover, they are drinkers of milk. Of gods they reverence the sun alone, and to him they sacrifice horses. And the rule of the sacrifice is this: to the swiftest of the gods they assign the swiftest of all mortal things. And that's not all. Our experts and regular viewers respond to all comments. Also check if you forgot to subscribe and set your bell to receive notifications about new audiobooks and other useful self-development materials that we release regularly. Join in the discussions, don't forget to give likes and, if possible and inspired, support the development of the channel financially. All useful links will be in the description and the first attached comment. Goodness, love and wisdom to all. And now move on to watch the next part of the video at the links below, or choose something from the playlists of the channel and those you see on the screen.